venture behind the lens, and step across the boundaries of conventional narratives. Today, we invite you to bear witness to the powerful, transformative moments that redefined everything we thought we knew.
I'm a sergeant major from the United States Army. Is there a problem, officer?
I don't care what you claim to be. Turn around.
I can provide my military ID. This can be verified.
Don't tell me how to do my job.
I have classified materials in my vehicle. This can cause a
Officer,
security
I don't care. Last warning.
Get on the ground!
Officer Charles Easton had been with the Fayetteville Police Department for 15 years when he decided to arrest a man in full Army combat uniform at a gas station on December 3, 2024. Those 5 minutes would cost him his freedom, his career, and 17 years of his life. The man standing before him wasn't just any soldier. He was a Delta Force commander returning from a classified Pentagon briefing. But Easton never verified credentials. He never made the call that would have prevented catastrophe. Instead, he deployed his taser twice against a handcuffed, compliant service member and unknowingly triggered a federal investigation that would dismantle his entire department. What Easton couldn't see through the fog of his own arrogance was that the calm man with his hands raised wasn't a victim. He was a consequence waiting to happen. December 3, 2024, began as an unremarkable Tuesday for Sergeant Major Jack Benson. At 42 years old, he had spent 19 years serving his country, the last 7 in Delta Force, the Army's most elite counterterrorism unit. That morning, he'd sat through a classified briefing at Joint Special Operations Command Headquarters at Fort Bragg, discussing operations that would never appear in any public record. By 7:15 p.m., Benson was driving home in his Army combat uniform, the same multicam pattern he'd worn during the briefing. He had one goal: surprise his daughter Ayanna for her 8th birthday. He'd been deployed for her last 2 birthdays, and this year he'd promised to be there. The gas station off Highway 401 in Fayetteville appeared ordinary. Fluorescent lights humming, a few cars at the pumps, the smell of gasoline and convenience store coffee mixing in the cool evening air. Benson pulled up to Pump 6, stepped out of his vehicle, and began fueling. He didn't notice the patrol car that pulled in 30 seconds later. Officer Charles Easton had been on patrol for 6 hours. At 47, he was a 15-year veteran of the Fayetteville Police Department with a record carefully buried in bureaucratic filing systems. He'd been passed over for promotion twice in 18 months, a fact that had left him bitter and resentful. His recent shift reports showed a troubling pattern of aggressive stops in predominantly black neighborhoods, though internal affairs had only just begun quietly investigating. When Easton saw Benson pumping gas in military uniform, something triggered in his mind. Perhaps it was the assumption that the uniform couldn't possibly be legitimate. Perhaps it was the reflexive suspicion that had come to define his policing style. Whatever the reason, Easton pulled his patrol car directly behind Benson's vehicle, blocking it in. At 7:18 p.m., Easton approached with his hand already resting on his service weapon. "Step out of the vehicle, now!" Benson turned, hands visible, posture relaxed but alert. 19 years of military training had prepared him for hostile encounters in foreign territories, but nothing had prepared him for this moment, standing in his own country, in uniform, about to be treated like an enemy combatant. "Officer, I'm Sergeant Major Jack Benson, United States Army Special Operations Command. Is there a problem?" Easton's hand moved closer to his weapon. "I said get on the ground. I don't care what you claim to be." The word claim hung in the air between them like a lit fuse. Benson recognized the tone immediately. This wasn't a routine traffic stop or a simple request for identification. This was an officer who had already decided what he was looking at, and no amount of evidence would change his mind. "Officer, I can provide my credentials," Benson said, reaching slowly toward his pocket. "I have my military identification card, my driver's license, and my common access card." "Keep your hands where I can see them." Benson raised his hands again, palms forward. "I'm just trying to provide identification, as requested." Easton stepped closer, his jaw set. "These could be fake. You could have bought that uniform online. Anyone can get one of those." Benson took a slow breath. He'd been trained to de-escalate hostile situations, to maintain composure under pressure. "Officer, my CAC card has holographic security features. The number on it can be verified immediately through the Department of Defense database. I can give you the contact information for my commanding officer at Fort Bragg. This can all be resolved in less than 5 minutes. Don't tell me how to do my job." Around them, the gas station had gone quiet. Alexa Lane, a nurse finishing her 12-hour shift, had stopped pumping gas at pump 4. Something about the officer's tone made her uneasy. She pulled out her phone and opened the camera app, her thumb hovering over the record button. At pump 6, River Adam, a 63-year-old retired Marine, stood frozen, his military training allowing him to read the situation with disturbing clarity. The uniform Benson wore was legitimate. The rank insignia, the unit patches, the proper wear of the ACU, everything was correct. Adam had seen enough imposters in his 30 years of service to spot them instantly. This wasn't one. Inside the convenience store, the clerk watched through the window and quietly pressed the silent alarm button beneath the counter. Benson tried once more. "Officer Easton," he'd read the nameplate, "I have classified materials in my vehicle related to my current assignment. You're creating a security incident. I'm asking you to verify my credentials through proper channels." Easton stepped forward until he was inches from Benson's face. "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. Last warning." Benson weighed his options. Resistance would escalate the situation. Compliance might diffuse it. His training told him to survive the encounter first, seek justice later. He turned around slowly, announcing each movement. "I'm complying with your order. I'm turning around. I'm placing my hands behind my back." The handcuffs clicked shut with unnecessary force, the metal biting into his wrists. Benson had been restrained during survival training, during simulated captures, during exercises designed to break most soldiers. But this felt different. This was his own country, his own people. The handcuffs were tighter than necessary. A deliberate choice, not an accident. Benson could feel the circulation being cut off in his hands, the metal edges pressing into bone. He'd experienced pain before, but this carried a different weight. This was punishment disguised as procedure. "Officer, these cuffs are too tight. I'm fully compliant. There's no need for—" "Shut your mouth." Alexa Lane pressed record. The timestamp on her phone read 7:21 p.m. 3 minutes had elapsed since Easton first approached Benson. 3 minutes that would alter multiple lives permanently. Benson remained silent for a moment, then spoke again, his voice level. "I'm an active duty service member. I'm required to inform you that you're detaining a federal officer without cause. I'm asking one final time. Please verify my credentials through official channels." Easton grabbed Benson's shoulder and spun him around. "Shut your mouth or I'll shut it for you." The threat hung in the air, clear, unambiguous, and illegal. Threatening a federal officer violated 18 U.S. Code Paragraph 111, a fact that would later be emphasized by federal prosecutors. But in that moment, Benson recognized something more dangerous than the legal violation. He recognized rage barely contained, authority wielded as a weapon, and the complete absence of procedural restraint. Benson had survived firefights by reading situations accurately and responding with precision. Every instinct told him this situation was deteriorating beyond recovery. He turned his head slightly, maintaining visual contact with Easton, standard threat assessment protocol from his special operations training. In hostile territory, you never lost sight of the aggressor. It was reflexive, automatic, a habit drilled into muscle memory through thousands of hours of training. Easton interpreted the movement as defiance. "I said don't move!" Easton's hand went to his belt, fingers wrapping around the bright yellow Taser X2. "You're resisting arrest." "I'm not resisting. I'm handcuffed. I'm not moving." River Adam took a step forward, his marine instincts screaming that this was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Officer, I'm former military. That man is wearing a legitimate uniform with correct insignia for a sergeant major in special operations. You need to back off or you're next." Adam stopped, but his hand was already in his pocket, fingers dialing. He'd memorized Easton badge number, 4782. Whatever was about to happen, there would be a record. There would be accountability. The timestamp read 7:23 p.m. 5 minutes since initial contact. Benson stood motionless, handcuffed, wearing the uniform of the United States Army, about to be assaulted by the very people he'd sworn to protect. The Taser X2 discharged with a sharp crack that cut through the evening air. 50,000 volts coursed through Benson's body in rhythmic pulses, 19 times per second, following a pattern designed to override muscular control and induce immediate incapacitation. Benson collapsed. The concrete rose up to meet him with brutal indifference. His face struck the ground, his body convulsing involuntarily as the electrical current commandeered his nervous system. The yellow wires stretched from Easton Taser to the 2 barbed probes embedded in Benson's back, visible even through the fabric of his uniform. Alexa Lane's phone captured every second. The sergeant major, a man trained to resist interrogation techniques designed to break prisoners of war, a man who had survived survival schools that washed out 70% of candidates, lay helpless on the gas station concrete, his body jerking with each electrical pulse. 5 seconds. The standard Taser cycle lasted 5 seconds. But those 5 seconds stretched into an eternity, each pulse a violation, each convulsion a testament to power, wielded without restraint or conscience. The cycle ended. Benson lay motionless, his breathing ragged, his muscles locked in involuntary spasms even after the current ceased. The Taser barbs remained embedded in his back. Then Easton pulled the trigger again. Another 5 seconds. Another wave of 50,000 volts. Completely unnecessary by any standard of law enforcement protocol, Benson wasn't resisting. He was incapacitated, handcuffed, face down on concrete. This wasn't about compliance. This was about dominance. This was about power asserting itself for no reason other than because it could. Alexa Lane's hands shook as she held her phone steady, tears streaming down her face. She'd been a nurse for 14 years, had seen trauma and suffering, but this was different. This was cruelty in uniform. The second cycle ended. Easton holstered the Taser and approached Benson prone form. He knelt down, yanked the barbed probes from Benson's back with no regard for the pain it caused, and hauled the sergeant major to his feet. Benson's legs barely held him. The Taser burn marks were visible through the torn fabric of his uniform, angry red welts where the barbs had penetrated skin. His face was scraped from the fall, a thin line of blood trickling from his split lip. "Let's go," Easton said, dragging Benson toward the patrol car. The timestamp on Alexa Lane's recording read 7:24 p.m. 6 minutes from initial contact to assault with a weapon. 6 minutes that would eventually cost Easton everything. Benson was placed in the back of Easton patrol car at 7:26 p.m., still handcuffed, his uniform torn and bloodied. The plastic seat was hard and uncomfortable, designed to be punitive rather than functional. Through the wire mesh separating the back seat from the front, Benson could see Easton typing on the patrol car's computer terminal, documenting the incident with a narrative that would later be proven entirely false. The ride to Fayetteville Police Department took 14 minutes. Benson sat in silence, his mind methodically cataloging every detail of the encounter. The time of initial contact, the exact wording of Easton threats, the witnesses present, the 2 taser deployments, the excessive force used during handcuffing. His special operations training had included extensive instruction on surviving unlawful detention. Ironically, most of it focused on foreign adversaries, not domestic law enforcement. At 7:52 p.m., Benson was processed into the Fayetteville Police Department holding facility. The intake officer, a younger patrolman named Rodriguez, hesitated when he saw Benson uniform and the visible taser burns on his back. "Is this guy really military?" Rodriguez asked Easton quietly. "Claims to be. Probably stolen valor. Booked him for impersonating a military officer, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct." Rodriguez didn't look convinced, but he completed the paperwork without comment. Benson was placed in holding cell 3, a 10 by 10 concrete room with a metal bench and a toilet. The handcuffs remained on for another 20 minutes before a different officer, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, finally removed them. Benson sat on the metal bench, his wrists red and swollen where the cuffs had bitten into flesh. He closed his eyes and took slow, controlled breaths. He'd been in worse situations, captured behind enemy lines during a mission in Syria, detained by hostile forces in Yemen. But this was different. This was home. This was the country he'd bled for. Meanwhile, 3 phone calls were being made that would alter the trajectory of the evening. River Adam sat in his truck in the gas station parking lot, his phone pressed to his ear. His first call was to Fort Bragg's Provost Marshal, the military police office responsible for law enforcement on base. "This is River Adam, retired Marine Corps, serial number 2256789. I just witnessed a civilian officer assault an active duty sergeant major in uniform. The soldier identified himself, provided credentials, and was fully compliant. The officer deployed a taser twice and arrested him for impersonating a military officer. I have the officer's badge number and location." His second call was to the Judge Advocate General's office, the military's legal division. His third call went directly to the Fort Bragg duty officer, who would relay the information up the chain of command to the commanding general of Joint Special Operations Command. Within 90 minutes, the machinery of military justice began moving with devastating efficiency. The 3 black SUVs arrived at the Fayetteville Police Department at exactly 9:47 p.m., 2 hours and 29 minutes after Sergeant Major Benson had been assaulted at the gas station. They moved with the precise coordination of a military operation because that's exactly what it was. The lead vehicle carried Colonel Patricia Reeves, a Judge Advocate General officer with 22 years of service, and a reputation for being utterly uncompromising when it came to protecting service members. The second vehicle held 2 Department of Defense investigators whose security clearances were classified at levels most police officers had never heard of. The third carried a liaison from the Pentagon's Office of Special Investigations. Police Chief Mark Henderson was in his office reviewing budget reports when his desk phone rang. His dispatcher sounded nervous. "Chief, there are military officials here. They're asking for you immediately. They say it's regarding an incident involving one of our officers and a federal service member." Henderson's stomach dropped. He'd been a police chief for 11 years and had navigated countless difficult situations, but the phrase military officials and federal service member in the same sentence sent a chill through him. The conference room on the second floor had been hastily arranged. Henderson entered to find 5 individuals in military dress uniforms and business attire, their expressions ranging from professional neutrality to barely contained fury. Colonel Reeves didn't waste time with pleasantries. She placed a folder on the table and opened it with deliberate precision. "Chief Henderson, I'm Colonel Patricia Reeves, Judge Advocate General's Corps. We're here regarding the unlawful detention and assault of Sergeant Major Jack Benson by one of your officers, Charles Easton, badge number 4782. Sergeant Major Benson is a Delta Force commander currently assigned to Joint Special Operations Command. He holds a top-secret SCI security clearance and was returning from a classified briefing when Officer Easton assaulted him without cause. She slid a series of documents across the table. Benson military identification, his official service record, with most of it redacted due to classification, his security clearance documentation, photographs of his taser injuries and facial lacerations. Your officer charged Sergeant Major Benson with impersonating a military officer. That's like charging the Secretary of Defense with trespassing in the Pentagon. We have body camera footage from Officer Easton showing he repeatedly refused to verify credentials, made explicit threats against a federal officer, and deployed a taser twice against a handcuffed, compliant service member. She paused, her gaze locked on Henderson. We also have civilian video footage that was uploaded to social media approximately 90 minutes ago. It currently has 600,000 views and is spreading rapidly. Henderson felt the blood drain from his face. I wasn't aware of this incident. Let me pull the reports. We've already reviewed Officer Easton's incident report. One of the DoD investigators interrupted. It contains multiple false statements, including claims that Sergeant Major Benson was acting suspiciously, refused to provide identification, and physically resisted arrest. All three claims are demonstrably false and contradicted by video evidence. Colonel Reeves leaned forward. Chief Henderson, assaulting a military officer is a federal crime. The Department of Justice will be notified within the hour. But before we proceed with federal charges, we need complete access to Officer Easton personnel file. Every arrest he's made in the past 5 years, every use of force report, and every complaint filed against him. Are you investigating? We're investigating whether this was an isolated incident of excessive force or part of a pattern of civil rights violations. Based on preliminary review, we believe it's the latter. Henderson reached for his phone with a shaking hand. Whatever was about to unfold, his department and his career were about to face a reckoning unlike anything he'd experienced. And Chief Henderson, Colonel Reeves added, Sergeant Major Benson will be released immediately. All charges dropped. If he's not standing in this room in the next 10 minutes, I'll have federal marshals here in 20. 9 minutes later, Benson stood in the conference room, still in his torn and bloodied uniform. Colonel Reeves saluted him, a gesture of respect that Easton had refused, and Benson returned it. Sergeant Major, on behalf of the Department of Defense, I apologize for what you endured tonight. This was a gross violation of your rights and your service to this country. We'll ensure this never happens again. Benson nodded once, his expression unreadable. But inside, something had shifted. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every service member who might face the same prejudice, the same abuse of power. This was about accountability. The viral spread of the video was unprecedented. Within 72 hours, Alexa Lane's recording had been viewed 43 million times across multiple social media platforms. News outlets covered the story. The hashtag #JusticeForBenson trended for 5 consecutive days. But the video did something more powerful than generate outrage. It gave permission. Permission for other victims to come forward, to speak about experiences they'd kept silent for years. The first call came to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division on December 5th, just 48 hours after the incident. Teresa Martinez, a 34-year-old schoolteacher, described being pulled over by Officer Easton in March 2022. She'd been driving home from her mother's house when Easton stopped her for failing to signal a lane change, a minor infraction that somehow resulted in her being handcuffed and searched on the side of the road while her 2 children watched from the back seat. No contraband was found, no ticket was issued. But she'd been humiliated, terrified and too afraid to file a complaint because who would believe me over a police officer? The second call came from Jack Thompson, a 41-year-old business owner. Easton had stopped him in September 2023, claiming his vehicle matched the description of one involved in a burglary. Thompson had been held at gunpoint, forced to lie on the ground in his business suit in front of his office building, while Easton ran his plates. The burglary suspect drove a red Honda. Thompson drove a black Mercedes. Different make, different model, different color. It didn't matter. 7 more victims came forward over the next week. 7 people with their own stories of being stopped without cause, searched without justification, threatened without provocation. 7 people whose only commonality was their race. The Department of Defense investigation, now joined by the FBI's Civil Rights Division, began a systematic review of Easton's career. The pattern was so stark that prosecutors would later call it textbook systemic discrimination. 63 traffic stops over 4 years. Easton patrol area demographics: 31% black, 62% white, 7% other. His stop demographics: 87% black, 9% white, 4% other. The statistical analysis was damning. The probability of such a disparity occurring by chance was less than 0.001%, essentially impossible without intentional targeting. 19 excessive force complaints had been filed against Easton over his 15-year career. 19 times citizens had formally complained about his conduct. 19 times the complaints had been reviewed by Internal Affairs. 19 times they'd been dismissed after cursory investigation, often with notes like "no sustained finding" or "insufficient evidence." The system hadn't just failed to stop Easton. It had enabled him, protected him, and given him implicit permission to continue. On December 12th, federal prosecutors filed formal charges: deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 242, assault on a federal officer, false imprisonment, battery, and filing false police reports. The state attorney general added charges of official misconduct and perjury. The Department of Justice simultaneously announced a pattern or practice investigation into the entire Fayetteville Police Department, a comprehensive review that would examine policies, training, hiring practices, and supervision. Police Chief Henderson, facing mounting pressure from city officials and community activists, announced his retirement effective immediately. The case became national news not just because of what happened, but because of what it revealed. This wasn't one bad officer. This was a system that had looked the other way for 15 years, while Charles Easton systematically violated the rights of the people he'd sworn to protect. And now, finally, there will be consequences. The trial of Charles Easton began on February 18, 2025, in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina. The courthouse was packed every day with journalists, activists, and citizens who'd traveled from across the state to witness justice, or its failure. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Lead prosecutor Amanda Lim presented body camera footage, frame by frame, dissecting every moment of the encounter. She showed how Benson had remained calm, compliant, and respectful throughout. She demonstrated how Easton had refused multiple opportunities to verify credentials, a process that would have taken less than 3 minutes. She presented expert testimony from law enforcement professionals who testified that every decision Easton made violated department policy, state law, and federal civil rights statutes. The video of the taser deployment was played in open court. Several jurors visibly recoiled. One wiped away tears. Sergeant Major Benson testified for 6 hours, over 2 days. He described the encounter with the precision of a military debrief. No emotion, just facts presented in chronological order, with perfect recall. He explained his special operations training, his security clearance, his current assignment. He detailed every attempt he'd made to de-escalate, every offer of verification, every effort to comply. Under cross-examination, Easton defense attorney tried to suggest Benson had been aggressive or threatening. Benson looked at the jury and said simply, "I've been trained to survive capture by enemy forces. I've endured interrogation techniques designed to break prisoners of war. I know how to de-escalate hostile situations." Officer Easton never felt threatened by me. He felt challenged by the uniform I wore and the rank I held. That's not the same thing. 7 other victims testified to their experiences with Easton. The pattern was unmistakable. The defense's case was weak and grew weaker by the day. Easton took the stand and insisted he'd feared for his safety. When prosecutors showed him footage of Benson standing motionless with hands raised, Easton claimed he perceived a threat. When asked why he deployed the taser a second time against a handcuffed, incapacitated man lying face down on concrete, Easton said he thought Benson was still resisting. The jury didn't believe him. 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing took place on March 8, 2025. Federal Judge Raymond Morrison had a reputation for measured, thoughtful rulings, but his words that day carried unusual weight and emotion. Officer Easton, you took an oath to serve and protect. You were given authority by the public, authority that comes with immense responsibility and trust. You violated that trust in the most profound way possible. You saw a decorated soldier who has served this nation with distinction and honor, and you saw only what your prejudice allowed you to see. You wielded your authority not to serve or protect, but to humiliate and harm. This court finds your actions not only criminal, but a betrayal of every principle of justice our society holds dear. The sentence, 17 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. Law enforcement certification permanently revoked. The civil trial followed quickly. The jury awarded Benson $4.2 million in damages, $2.1 million in compensatory damages, and $2.1 million in punitive damages. Easton pension, his house, his savings, everything was seized. It wouldn't come close to covering the judgment. Easton appeals were denied at every level. On March 15, 2025, he entered federal custody at FCI Butner, a medium-security facility in North Carolina. In his final statement to the court, given a chance to express remorse, Easton said only, "I was just doing my job." He still didn't understand, and perhaps he never would. The consequences of that December evening extended far beyond Charles Easton's prison sentence. The Department of Justice's pattern or practice investigation into the Fayetteville Police Department took 6 months and resulted in a 78-page report documenting systemic failures in training, supervision, accountability, and civil rights protections. The findings were damning. The department had failed to properly investigate excessive force complaints. Officers with troubling patterns of behavior had been promoted rather than disciplined. Use of force training focused on compliance and control rather than de-escalation and constitutional policing. The report concluded that these failures had created a culture where officers like Easton could operate with impunity. The remedy was comprehensive. The Fayetteville Police Department entered a consent decree requiring a minimum of 5 years of federal oversight. Every policy was reviewed and rewritten. Every officer underwent mandatory retraining. A civilian oversight board was established with real investigative power and the authority to recommend discipline. 17 officers faced disciplinary action for their roles in dismissing complaints against Easton. 5 were terminated for what internal investigators called deliberate indifference to civil rights violations. Police Chief Henderson's retirement became permanent. The new chief, appointed after a national search, was an outsider with a track record of reform and a mandate for cultural transformation. New department policies were implemented immediately. Mandatory verification of military credentials before any enforcement action. Independent civilian review of all body camera footage involving use of force, quarterly bias audits of traffic stop data, and comprehensive training on implicit bias developed in consultation with civil rights organizations. But the impact reached beyond Fayetteville. The case became required training material for police academies in 42 states. The International Association of Chiefs of Police featured it in their national conference as a cautionary tale about the cost of failing to hold officers accountable. Law enforcement agencies across the country reviewed their own complaint investigation processes and use of force policies. Sergeant Major Jack Benson returned to active duty on March 18, 2025, 3 months after the incident. He received a formal written apology from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and a commendation for maintaining military bearing and discipline under unlawful and unconstitutional duress. His daughter's birthday party, delayed by months, finally happened with his entire Delta Force unit in attendance. Alexa Lane, the nurse who recorded the incident, received a commendation from the North Carolina Civil Liberties Union for her role in ensuring accountability. She framed it and hung it in her living room, beneath a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." River Adam used his testimony and media attention to launch the Veterans Justice Project, a nonprofit organization focused on protecting active duty service members and veterans from discriminatory policing. Within 8 months, the organization had chapters in 16 states and had successfully intervened in 12 cases of suspected civil rights violations against military personnel. The gas station where the encounter occurred became an unlikely landmark. The owner, moved by the events, installed a small memorial plaque near Pump 6. It didn't celebrate what happened there. Celebrations would have been obscene. Instead, it acknowledged the moment and the change it catalyzed. On this site, December 3, 2024, injustice was witnessed. Justice was demanded. Reform was achieved. When asked in a later interview about forgiveness, Benson offered a response that captured both his military discipline and his fundamental humanity. Forgiveness is personal. Accountability is institutional. I'm still working on the first, but we got the second, and that matters. That matters for every person who might face what I faced. That matters for every officer who does the job right and suffers because bad officers go unpunished. Accountability isn't vengeance. It's how we become better. Charles Easton remained in federal prison. His requests for early release were denied. His attempts to overturn his conviction failed at every level of appeal. In prison intake interviews, when asked to explain his crimes and show remorse, a key factor in potential parole considerations, he continued to insist he'd just been doing his job. The system had finally worked. Not quickly enough. Not soon enough to prevent the harm Easton had inflicted on dozens of people over 15 years. But it worked. And in a country still grappling with questions of police accountability, systemic racism, and equal justice under law, that single fact carried enormous weight. The uniform, whether blue or camouflage, carries responsibility, not immunity. Authority comes with accountability. And sometimes justice requires not just individual consequences, but systemic transformation. Sergeant Major Jack Benson understood that. So did the 43 million people who watched that video and demanded better from the institutions meant to protect them. And slowly, painfully, imperfectly, the system began to change.
Documents and official records are the absolute foundation of our history, framing the stories that shape our reality. Every story is a relentless pursuit of genuine truth. Thank you for dedicating your valuable time to investigate these truths with us.